legalizefreedom.com.
Good evening. I'm Greg Moffat of legalizefreedom.com. That's legalize-freedom.com, and you can spell legalize with an S or a Z. Today I want to give you all a little bit of an update and a reminder about the World Economic Forum annual meeting that takes place in Davos in Switzerland, and it's happening right now. January 26th to 29th, although having subsequently revisited the World Economic Forum website, it looks like it may be starting tomorrow, actually, as I record this, Monday the 25th and running through to the 29th. In any event, the subject for this year, for the conference, is the Great Reset. Now, if you've been paying attention to my channel, and indeed many, many others, all forms of media outlets, especially in the alternative community, this term, the Great Reset, is something that you will probably have heard a great deal about during the last year, or certainly at the very least found hard to avoid in some size, shape or form. And what I'm putting forward today is merely a reminder that this event, this pivotal event, is happening right now. But also to, for those of you who haven't already, if you go back across the website, legalizefreedom.com, as mentioned, or Legalize Freedom 1, the YouTube channel, going right back to last June, you'll find a long series of videos on this subject that I've done, all different dimensions and aspects of it, not all necessarily concerned with the Great Reset agenda, but just with the coronavirus pandemic in general, and these two are in many people's minds intimately intertwined, and certainly they do seem to be fundamentally connected when you look into it. So check out those videos, because I have to say I have a lot more to say about many different aspects of all of this, and if you don't already have it, this will give you a lot of background to what's unfolding at the moment. At the start of this video, you'll have seen a few graphics and a couple of pages of text which laid out what the World Economic Forum call the context and the opportunity. And briefly summarized in those few paragraphs that you hopefully will have read are kind of where we are now and what that might allow to happen next. Now, I'd urge you to go along and have a look at the event program. That's kind of the whole point of this, is like, don't let this go by. If you're interested in this, in geopolitics and in fact what's unfolding around you with the pandemic at all, don't let this event slip by without paying some attention to it. So have a look at the event program. You'll find a link to that in the information on beneath this video. And just click on that and you can see all the talks that are planned for each day. Now, those a couple of introductory paragraphs that you saw in the graphics here, context and opportunity, if you've glanced through those, you'll quickly become aware that the Great Reset agenda portion of the World Economic Forum website, and probably their entire output, is constructed of the worst kind of corporate management speak that you can imagine. If you've ever worked for a corporation or in a big company, all of that stuff that you just think, you read through it, a paragraph, and you have to stop and say, like, what has just been said there? You know, it's probably important, but I don't understand it. Not because I'm stupid, but because of the words that are used, the language that it's used to express it. It's a bit like legalese, you know, when you see terms and conditions on a new product, or if you've ever been sent a contract to sign, you've gone through it and thought, oh, Jesus Christ, I've got no idea what this actually says. So, and I think there's a reason for that. For example, very commonly in the World Economic Forum Great Reset literature, you'll hear phrases like global stakeholders. And stakeholder for me has always been problematic. Anytime I hear that, I just run for the hills, screaming. I mean, it means it's someone or something that holds a stake in someone or something. But again, it becomes meaningless. I could be a stakeholder. You're probably a stakeholder, but what in? You know? And these global stakeholders, they will cooperate simultaneously. Now, for watchers, seasoned watchers of globalist shenanigans, global simultaneous cooperation will probably ring alarm bells. But that, of course, is one of the main threads that runs through the Great Reset proposals, is that whatever it is they're actually talking about, it will involve simultaneous cooperation globally. Two of their other buzzwords, inclusive and sustainable. And these are words that of the type that are used quite often in proposals that may turn out to actually be quite insidious or undesirable. You see this a lot in the context of identity politics and wokesterism. Things that is, on the face of it, it's hard to argue against. Like, for example, inclusive. Well, who wouldn't want that? But then inclusive of what? Because if you could include negative things in that. Sustainable is another one. Who wouldn't want life in general to be sustainable? What's the alternative? Being unsustainable. So this is sort of language that peppers all this literature, and it's inviting you to sort of agree with it, to go along with it before you actually know what it is, because you're going, oh, cooperation, sustainability, inclusivity, you know, what's not to like? But the bottom line is, and I'll narrow it back down again to the literature that's the online presentations regarding this year's Great Reset agenda forum, is that at bottom line, it doesn't really say anything. And in fact, I know I invited you earlier to go and look at the event program. You will find as you go to each of the days and you go down, you see every hour there's one or more talks beginning at 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 a.m. through to the early evening. That the titles themselves can sound fairly vague, and then you look at a 1 or 2 line description and that's fairly vague, and you just have a list of participants. So the only way you're going to find out, and I suspect even if you do this you won't find out, but the only way you might find out what's actually being proposed by the World Economic Forum in ways that will affect all our lives would be to sit through all that. And even then, I think journalists are going to be left, and individuals like ourselves are going to be left attempting to analyze this stuff in vain for some time to come. There was a news conference a week ago, again hosted on the World Economic Forum, specifically the Great Reset section of the website. And that involved Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, being interviewed by various stakeholders, I don't know who they were, from around the world, asking him questions about the upcoming conference. And two words to take away from that. I mean, the whole thing was boring as hell. These things, I think, are actually designed to be, to just get you to switch off. It's why people who study law get paid a lot for it, because hardly anybody wants to deal with that monotonous minutiae, as you know, for the short time that they're here on Earth. So if you're prepared to do that, you get paid a lot. But two words that came up again and again are crucial and pivotal in terms of 2021, or at the time we're living in. And this comes up again right throughout all of the, not just the World Economic Forum, not just the Great Reset, but all of the related agendas that many of us have been aware of for years and even decades. You know, where it's an air of inevitability about it, and there's no doubt that 2021 is going to be a pivotal year for us in many ways with regards to the Great Reset agenda, what happens economically, socially, politically across the globe, where the pandemic situation, whatever you believe that to be, and whether it is connected with the Great Reset. If you thought 2020 was a year of like mind-bending change, then I don't think you've actually seen anything yet. Two things, if we begin to move this on a little bit and relate it back to theories about what all this is about, two things I would throw out there are, first of all, the word technocracy and also the term scientific dictatorship. Now, scientific dictatorship was a term, if not coined by Aldous Huxley, then certainly used by him in the context of his famous novel, Brave New World. And technocracy, I'm not going to go into a lengthy explanation of what that involves here, but you can look up technocracy. You can just Google it, because it's a system of running a society. Let's just put it like that, and it has roots going back to the early 20th century, so it's not new. And many of the goals of globalists and people like Klaus Schwab, World Economic Forum, and indeed many politicians and NGOs and elements of the United Nations and all sorts of people and organizations, many of their goals and how they would like to see society operate, these principles can be tied directly back to the original ideals of technocracy, which is basically government by those who know best, not by elected officials, not by smiling hair helmet guys or women who, you know, promise that everything will be, you know, glorious and golden if you elect them, but by people who know better than you how to run things. And for those of you who've been around the alt scene for a while, let me just throw out a couple of things I've mentioned before in this context. So technocracy and scientific dictatorship tie very closely in with the potential future society outlined in the Zeitgeist movement. You may remember the Zeitgeist movies from a few years back. Last time I looked, there were still just 3 of them. That movement is still going. Also tied to the Venus Project, which I think is now basically defunct. And the idea behind these is a resource-based economy, and that can dovetail perfectly with the idea of technocracy. It's a scientific, if not dictatorship, then scientific rule. It's a way of managing an economy according to needs, not wants. And, well, if you're unfamiliar with any of those terms, have a look at them. A really good website to go to, and the guy is really in his element at the moment, Patrick M. Wood. And he, if you just Google technocracy and Patrick M. Wood, and this guy's been around the block a few times, he knows what he's talking about, but his website is an excellent aggregator for information on technocracy and where things are going at the minute. And he, of course, has really upped his game now because this is the moment, as he feels. There is talking about zeitgeist movement, and there is a strong cult-like feel about a lot of the Great Reset agenda and advocates for it. I'm not so sure that the people necessarily at the top of the tree or individuals like Klaus Schwab, I'm not sure how much of their snake oil that they really buy at a deep emotional or psychological level. It may just be a very practical gambit for them, just a way they see of how the only way that things can be done. But then these are not people really known for their emotions or their passions or anything that really you would think of as human. You know, they see people as basically cattle to be managed, and the resources of the earth just purely in utilitarian terms. You know, we have a certain amount of good X and a certain amount of good Y, and you know, this can be exchanged for this, and you know, and blah blah blah. It's just the most boring end of economics, and as tedious as it comes. But interestingly, one thing I noticed, it was pointed out to me that, and there's also a little image at the graphic segment at the start of this video that shows a number of world leaders, or you know, movers and shakers, powerful people. Bill Gates, I think Emmanuel Macron might be there, Boris Johnson, and one other I can't quite remember. And they're wearing this little pin badge on their lapels. And it just appears to be a little circular thing, sort of quite brightly coloured. It might look like a sort of pride thing if you didn't know better. But if you look at two images on the graphics prior to this, you'll see that it's actually a sort of a Great Reset logo of sorts. So there's nothing particularly, you know, sinister about any of that. But if you understand symbolism, propaganda, messaging, how magic basically works in all of this, spellbinding, then if somebody is standing in front of you telling you something, how things are going to be, what you are going to do, because there is no choice, backed up with a powerful symbol, cross, pentagram, hexagram, mandala of some sort, it could be anything at all. That's incredibly powerful backup to what is being said. And oftentimes, this occurs all the time in advertising. If you look up symbolism in advertising and corporate logos, you'll find a wealth of material on this. So I thought it was interesting to see. In fact, it might be Justin Trudeau, the other one, the Canadian PM, wearing one of these little badges, but it just sends a little message just saying, you know, and most people, of course, will never notice these things. On to the practicalities of this. In economic terms, there was one thing that I was struck by. I saw a message recently, and it was somewhere on social media or in an email newsletter, and someone talked about, the line in it said, and it caught my eye, demand destruction was always their only game. And that caught my eye because it's a term in economics, demand destruction. And unlike most gibberish jargon in economics, it actually says what it means, more or less. It's destruction of demand. Most technical jargon tends to be either absolutely impenetrable and meaningless, or it actually is so simplistic it just says what it does, but the practitioners of that dark art will tell you, but there's more to it than that. In any event, because the Great Reset agenda, along with a lot of other sustainable development ideas, because they effectively boil down to a future world, and again, this ties in with the zeitgeist movement, a future world of less people, having less, and doing less, wanting less is key to making that happen. Demand destruction. And what have you seen on your high street in the last 10 months? The destruction of demand. Initially, through the inability to consume, nowhere to go, nothing to buy apart from the bare basics, but ultimately the destruction of demand. And even when there were temporary relaxations of lockdowns and other restrictions, certainly here in the UK, but I'm hearing anecdotal reports from other places as well, because people were so cowed by the social restrictions and in some cases so afraid of the virus, when opportunities for consumption resumed, they weren't taken up. Demand had been destroyed. And by the way, demand destruction in economics means a permanent reduction in demand, not a temporary one. A few other things that you might have been aware of in the past that nexus in with this, the Great Reset agenda, are UN agenda, United Nations Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, and the Sustainable Development Goals. I've touched upon these obliquely in the last few minutes. Don't have time to get into any of that, but you can look it up and you can see where the overlaps are and see what the direction of travel might be. Now, in all of this, what I've been saying, I'm aware that an argument can be made for this. In the very first video that I did on this subject last June, COVID-19, what's really happening, I surmised, or theorized I should say, that perhaps with years and years of pushing and propaganda and information saying that we've got enormous energy problems, enormous environmental problems, enormous economic problems, our industrial civilization is not sustainable. We have to pull back from this. We have to find a different way of being on the planet. And I theorized, well, maybe that's what this is about. That as a global civilization, we would not go along with that. After years of all that environmental campaigning, carbon emissions, for example, were going up. Fossil fuel use was going up. Resource use in general was climbing, despite developments in green energy and more sustainable materials. Overall, all the metrics, including population, were just climbing with no end in sight. So I thought perhaps this is a way to just say, okay, look, almost like it's treating a child. If you're going to keep eating all the sweets, if you're going to take all the cookies out of the cookie jar, and I've told you too many cookies are bad for you, we're going to put the cookie jar on the top shelf and you won't be able to get to it. So every now and again, you'll get a bit of a cookie, and because that's the only way that we can manage this. And I have heard people writing quite passionately that we do need to make these changes, and wasn't it so wonderful in the wake of the initial lockdowns how environmental conditions locally all around the world improved, the ozone layer hole going away or covering over, clear skies over LA, clear water in Venice canals. Who wouldn't want that? But where we are right now, as a result of lockdowns and other draconian social restrictions, anything that could be achieved this way, for me, the burden of negative energy because of the fear, the cruelty and the lies and the destruction of human emotions and human psyche resulting from this makes it a very bad way to try and achieve anything positive. It's kind of just end justifies the means stuff. And I did read an article just today, and the author was arguing his perspective was that all of this was really about the perilous position that the US economy, the global economy, of course, but the US economy being so important within that, after the financial crisis of 2008, that the too big to fail organizations in the wake of that just got bigger, and the bubbles just got blown even larger, so that everything that brought us to the brink of disaster then had basically continued and got worse. And at the end of the US dollar as a global reserve currency has been looming for a long time now. And so in order to avoid a catastrophic crash that could lead to people's bank accounts going to zero, just food shortages, riots in the streets, martial law, all sorts of absolute pandemonium that would hurt millions of people really severely immediately It would look like some kind of apocalyptic disaster movie. In order to avoid that, to just pause everything. Pause the global economy. Just stop. Just stop. To give time to either enact policies to unwind this situation, bearing in mind this author was talking about just this economic situation, or to figure out what the hell to do. Like pressing pause in a computer game or something, or pressing pause in a movie. You know, what's going to happen next. Just a timeout, basically. Even if that's the case, then I just think that the appalling cruelty and suffering of the last 10 months, again, has made it a very bad place to be coming from, to be trying to achieve change. Does that fly in the face of what I just said about what the alternative might be? Maybe, but we still don't know what's behind all this. And that's part of the reason why I would encourage everyone to review the videos I've done, say, since June. There's many of them in this subject. They all address a different area of this. Find other people doing the same thing. Put your own conclusions together. It might be too early for conclusions, but look at the World Economic Forum Davos Agenda 2021, titled The Great Reset. Look at what they're talking about and see if we can learn anything from that, and then look around you and see what's unfolding. Because as I said earlier, by hook or by crook, even more so than 2020, 2021 is going to be a pivotal year in world affairs, in your life and in mine. To round off, I would just say, even right to this point where the World Economic Forum Davos meeting is about to happen, a few hours from now, people are still crying conspiracy theory. Articles still being published in mainstream media outlets saying this is a conspiracy theory. Well, apart from looking at the program on the website, if you're hearing people saying this, point them to all the resources that are out. I mean, you just Google Great Reset. You'll be there for the next month looking at links. Point them to, for a couple of examples, the cover of Time magazine quite recently, The Great Reset, all laid out in there, articles by a lot of the usual suspects. Point them to, and I reviewed this in one of my videos, COVID-19, The Great Reset, co-authored by Klaus Schwab, founder of the World Economic Forum. It's all laid out in here, you know, in black and white and blue. What I think we're actually facing, a book, if you want to have a look at another book, which maybe I'll review another day. What I think the next 200 years is actually more likely to look like, regardless of economics, energy, social or political changes, no matter what happens with technocracy or control systems, surveillance, you name it, all of this stuff that's coming down on us now potentially, and we're all trying to figure out what the hell's going on. This. The Long Descent, John Michael Greer, he's been a regular guest on mine on the show, legalizefreedom.com. Not for a while, but for many years he was on routinely. And if you go to legalizefreedom.com and look up John Michael Greer, that's a lot more of what I think we'll be seeing in the rest of your lifetime and the lifetimes of your children and grandchildren. So until next time, I'm Greg Moffat, and you've been listening to legalizefreedom.com.
legalizefreedom.com